Chapter 1. Back to the World. The first full night inside the safe house passes without anyone really sleeping. The building does its job well enough. The windows are reinforced and hidden behind ordinary blinds that make the place look like another forgotten office tucked between warehouses and old government contractors that have outlived their purpose. The bedrooms are small but functional, each with narrow beds, clean linens sealed in plastic, and the kind of generic furniture that seems designed to discourage attachment. Whoever built this place expected people to stay here for days, maybe weeks, but never long enough to mistake it for home. I spend most of the night staring at the ceiling. Every time I close my eyes, I expect to feel him again. Not Nathaniel, the teacher. The memory of the contact refuses to settle into something I can explain to myself. Nathaniel always felt like force, pressure, an intrusion that announced itself by disturbing everything around it. The teacher was quieter than that, controlled, deliberate. It felt less like someone breaking into my thoughts and more like discovering someone had been standing silently in the room long before I noticed they were there. By the time morning arrives, the common area has become occupied one person at a time. My father is already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and one of Carver's old legal pads spread out in front of him. He isn't writing much, mostly drawing lines between names and dates from memory, building his own version of a caseboard without a wall to pin it on. Carver comes out of the rear bedroom a few minutes later, carrying two government-issued cell phones that had been powered down since we left the mountains. He sets one in front of me and keeps the other for himself. "We can't disappear forever," he says. The world has a way of noticing absence. People like to think intelligence agencies are constantly watching everything, but most of the time they're simply watching for patterns that stop making sense. A missed report, an unanswered message, a phone that should have moved but didn't. Individually, they don't mean much. Together, they become questions. Questions lead to unwanted attention. My father looks up from the notebook. "How much time do we have?" Carver checks the phone before answering. "I bought us 2 days." "And after that?" He slips the phone back into his pocket. "After that, people start knocking." The words hang over the room while I look toward the far side, where Nathaniel sits exactly where we left him the night before. He slept in the chair despite Carver offering him one of the bedrooms. Or maybe he didn't sleep at all. It's hard to tell anymore. The injury in his shoulder looks better after my father cleaned and redressed it. But there is something else about him now that still feels incomplete. He's listening again, not to us, to the silence. Carver walks over and unclips the restraints from the steel anchor in the floor, leaving Nathaniel's wrists secured, but giving him enough freedom to stand and move around the common area under supervision. My father watches the entire process carefully, every old law enforcement instinct still intact despite retirement. Nathaniel rubs one wrist absent-mindedly after he stands. Then he says something that changes the direction of the morning. "You should go back." Carver looks at him. "Back where?" "To work," he says. My father almost laughs. "You think we're just going to leave you here?" Nathaniel shakes his head. "No. I'm saying the longer you stay away, the more people start noticing." Carver folds his arms. "We'll deal with that." Nathaniel looks directly at him. "You don't understand." The room grows quiet again. "The people you're looking for," Nathaniel says, choosing his words carefully now. "They hide in the open. inside organizations of influence and power. But they will go to ground at the first indication that there is a liability that they cannot control. You are that liability. I watch Carver's expression change almost imperceptibly. Not agreement, but rather understanding. Because both of us know the same thing. Whatever happened in the mountains is over. The investigation starts now. And if we're going to find Meridian, Selene Ward, or anyone connected to them, we can't do it hiding inside an off-grid safe house forever. Eventually, we have to walk back into the very system we're starting to suspect. The thought stays with me while I pick up the government phone and hold it in my hand without turning it on. As reality starts to set in, I realize that the outside world feels more dangerous than the one we left behind. Chapter 2. Business as usual. Carver leaves first. There's no discussion about it once the decision is made. The less time we spend standing around convincing ourselves this is a good idea, the easier it becomes to move. He changes into a plain suit he finds sealed in one of the storage lockers, trading the mountain and the safe house for the version of himself the Bureau expects to see. By the time he walks back into the common room, he looks exactly like Thomas Carver again. That bothers me more than I expect. It reminds me how easy it is to wear the right face. "You sure about this?" my father asks. Carver adjusts his watch and slips his phone into his jacket pocket. "No," he says. "But staying here isn't a plan." I know he's right. The safe house is a pause, not a solution. He looks at me and says, "You're up after me. Give it an hour." I nod. The idea is simple enough. Separate arrivals, separate explanations. Two unrelated federal employees checking back in after an investigation that took longer than expected. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth remembering. Carver leaves without another word. The front door closes behind him, and the building immediately feels different. My father walks over to the window, careful to stay behind the blinds. "You trust him?" The answer comes easier than I expect. "Yes." He nods once. "That's good," he says, "because I think he's about the only person in this whole mess who still knows where the ground is." Nathaniel lets out the faintest sound that almost resembles a laugh. "There isn't any ground," he says quietly. My father turns toward him. "You got something useful to add?" Nathaniel looks down at his hands. "No." The honesty catches all of us slightly off guard. He isn't trying to manipulate the conversation anymore. If anything, he seems content to let it move around him, like a man sitting in the aftermath of a storm that nobody else fully understands yet. I finally switch my government phone back on. The screen lights immediately. 3 missed calls. 2 emails. 1 secure message. Nothing urgent. Routine check-ins. Status requests. Administrative noise. The ordinary machinery of the agency continuing without me. I should feel relieved. Instead, I find myself staring at the screen, wondering who else can see it. I'm not afraid of going back to work. I'm afraid that when I walk through those doors, I'll realize none of this started in the mountains. That it's already there. Waiting. An hour passes slowly. Carver sends 1 message. "All clear. Come in." I stand up and slip the phone into my pocket. My father walks me to the door. "You call if anything feels wrong." I almost tell him that I'm not sure I'd recognize normal anymore. Instead, I nod. Then I step outside and head back toward the world we thought we understood. Chapter 3. The Pitch. The drive to DIA feels almost normal. Morning traffic has settled into its usual rhythm by the time I reach the outer security gate. Government employees move through checkpoints carrying coffee and briefcases, talking about meetings and deadlines and things that mattered 3 days ago. For a moment, I just sit there watching them, trying to remember what it felt like to believe the world worked the way it appeared to. The guard scans my badge and waves me through without hesitation. No extra questions. No second look. I hate how relieved that makes me feel. The building itself hasn't changed. Same polished floors, same neutral walls designed to make every office feel interchangeable. The smell of burnt coffee and recycled air follows me through the lobby, while analysts and administrators move around me with the quiet urgency that exists inside every federal building. Nobody knows where I've been. Nobody knows what happened on that mountain. At least that's what I tell myself. My supervisor, Deputy Director Helen Mercer, is already waiting when I reach her office. She closes the folder she was reading and gestures toward the chair across from her desk. She studies me for a second longer than necessary. "You look tired." "I am." She nods, apparently satisfied with the answer. "So, what was important enough to disappear for 2 days?" I knew this question was coming during the entire drive over. The truth would end the conversation immediately, and probably my career along with it. So I tell the version that's still true. Agent Carver and I found overlap between several behavioral anomaly investigations. Different jurisdictions. Different agencies. Similar outcomes. While an investigation of this nature doesn't really fall within the purview of DIA, we do from time to time provide support and resources to other government agencies if we feel that it aligns with our mission to protect national security. Mentioning Project Meridian may give me traction to convince her to allow me to move forward pursuing leads, although it poses a significant risk to keeping the investigation close to the chest. Mercer leans back slightly. What kind of outcomes? Witnesses changing statements, missing time, subjects behaving completely outside established patterns. She doesn't interrupt. There are references to an old interagency project called Meridian, I continue. I think it deserves another look. Her expression doesn't change. Not surprise, not recognition, nothing. For a second, I wonder if Nathaniel was wrong. Maybe Meridian really is forgotten. When did you hear that name? The question is quiet enough that I almost miss what matters about it. Not what is it? When did you hear it? Recently, I answer carefully. She watches me for another moment before continuing. I remember seeing it years ago, she says. Administrative archive review. Never paid much attention to it. I believe that part. Mostly. Why would we need to investigate something like this? It's not part of what we do here, she says. Luckily, I came prepared. One of Carver's case files contained an incident where a DIA engineering analyst at the Redstone Arsenal shot and killed a city councilman in Huntsville, Alabama. No recollection, no motive. It was random in every way possible except that he has no memory of anything that happened that day. I placed the file on her desk and explained as she looked it over. I'd like permission to pursue it jointly with the Bureau. She folds her hands together. You and Carver? Yes. For how long? 30 days. The office grows quiet. Outside, people continue walking past the open doorway carrying folders and laptops, completely unaware that my entire future may depend on the next sentence. Finally, Mercer nods. If there's a connection between agencies, I'd rather we know about it before someone else does. Relief starts to settle into me. Then she adds, You'll need a formal task force request. Small team, limited oversight. I want weekly updates. I can do that, I say. And Mara. I stop before reaching the door. If this turns into a ghost story, I'm shutting it down. I manage the smallest smile. Understood, I say. But it won't. She returns it. Good. I leave her office carrying provisional approval and a folder authorizing preliminary interagency coordination. It should feel like progress. Instead, I can't stop thinking about the way she asked the question. Not, what is Meridian? But, when did you hear that name? I'm beginning to wonder if some people don't need to be part of the conspiracy to know it existed. Maybe they just survived working close enough to it not to forget. Chapter 4. The Bureau. Carver calls an hour later. The conversation lasts less than 30 seconds. Meet me. Where? Cafeteria. 1 o'clock. Then the line goes dead. I spend the next 2 hours pretending to work. The reports waiting in my inbox might as well be written in another language. Satellite assessments. Regional updates. Threat summaries. My eyes move across the words without retaining any of them. Every few minutes I catch myself looking toward the office door whenever someone walks past, half expecting the teacher's voice to find me again in the middle of fluorescent lights and ordinary conversations. It never does. By the time I arrive at FBI headquarters, the lunch crowd is thinned enough that nobody pays much attention to one more federal employee carrying a visitor badge. The cafeteria sits under harsh white lighting, full of government furniture that somehow looks temporary, despite having probably been there for 20 years. Carver is already sitting near the back. A folder rests on the table in front of him beside an untouched cup of coffee. How'd it go? I ask as I sit down. They signed off. I stare at him. That was fast. They've been trying to get agencies to cooperate for years. I gave them a reason. I can't help smiling. What reason? Carver slides the folder across the table. The cover reads, Joint Behavioral Analysis Task Force. Temporary authorization. Duration, 30 days. Participating agencies, FBI/DIA, limited personnel assignment. Minimal administrative oversight. I look back up at him. They actually approved this? I asked, surprised. They approved exactly what we told them. Which wasn't a lie. Behavioral anomalies and multi-jurisdictional overlap. Cold cases with unexplained similarities. Nothing supernatural. Nothing impossible. Just enough truth to build around. How many people? I ask. 4 to start, he replies. I nod slowly. Small. Controllable. Carver finally picks up the coffee and takes a drink before making a face that suggests it tastes exactly the way government coffee always does. My section chief had heard of Meridian. I look up immediately. He knew what it was? Carver shakes his head. No. What did he say? He said he remembered hearing the name years ago, thought it was some abandoned behavioral research project. The answer mirrors mine almost perfectly. Neither of them knew what Meridian was, but both remembered it existing. Carver notices the same conclusion settling into me. Whatever Meridian was, he says quietly, it touched a lot of desks. I look back down at the authorization paperwork. 4 personnel. The thought feels larger than the paper in front of me. We need people we trust. Carver nods. And people who don't ask the wrong questions too early. I know exactly who he means. Analysts. Investigators. Technical specialists. People useful enough to help, but grounded enough not to walk away the moment the story stops making sense. "You have someone?" I ask. Carver looks out across the cafeteria for a second before answering. "One." "FBI?" He nods. "Retired consultant. Behavioral science." "What makes him special?" Carver looks back at me. He notices things other people explain away. I think about Nathaniel, the teacher, Selene Ward. Maybe that's exactly what we need. Carver stands, gathering the folder. "I'll make the call tonight." "And me?" He gives the smallest hint of a smile. "You know your own people better than I do." As he walks away toward the exit, I look down one last time at the task force authorization resting in my hands. 30 days. Officially, we've been given a month to chase a dead government program and a collection of unsolved cases. Unofficially, we've just been handed enough freedom to start pulling on threads nobody has touched in years. I can't decide if that makes me feel safer, or if someone wanted us to have it. Chapter 5. Old Ghosts. When I get back to the safe house, my father is gone. For one brief second, my heart climbs into my throat before I see the note sitting on the kitchen table. "Back before dark, following a lead." Carver reads it twice before setting it back down. Neither of us says what we're both thinking. My father spent 30 years chasing loose ends for a living. You don't retire from something like that. You just stop getting paid for it. The moment he understood this wasn't confined to one mountain and one man, he started building his own investigation. Nathaniel sits quietly near the window, watching the conversation without participating. Carver turns toward him. "You know where he'd go?" Nathaniel shakes his head. "No." "You don't seem very curious." Nathaniel lowers his eyes. "I know what people do when they need answers." That response stays with me longer than it should. Carver disappears into one of the back rooms to make another phone call, leaving me alone with Nathaniel and the silence that seems to follow him everywhere now. I sit down across from him. "You really don't know anything about Meridian?" He looks at me for a moment before answering. "I know they existed." "How?" "People talked." I wait. He studies his own hands. "The teacher used to say there were organizations that collected stories they didn't understand. He told me to stay away from them." "Why?" Nathaniel finally looks up. "Because people who can't explain something always try to own it." Before I can ask another question, the front door opens. My father steps inside carrying an old cardboard file box with one arm and a paper grocery bag in the other. Carver comes out of the hallway immediately. "What did you find?" My father sets the box down on the table carefully. "I paid a visit to an old friend." He starts unpacking the contents one piece at a time. Case folders, photographs, and interview transcripts. Yellow legal pads filled with handwritten notes. I kept copies of a few investigations over the years, stuff that never sat right with me. Carver picks up one of the folders. "Department let you walk out with evidence?" My father almost smiles. "No." That answer tells me everything. He opens the first file. Virginia. 14 years ago. Male subject. No criminal history. No psychiatric history. Assaulted his own business partner without apparent motive. Claimed afterward, he had no memory of the event. My father slides the witness statement across the table toward me. "Read the last paragraph." The witness described trying to restrain the man during the attack. He wasn't angry. He wasn't screaming. According to the statement, he looked confused. The final line reads, "It was like he was not under his own control. Creepy." I slowly set the paper back down. Carver has already opened another folder. Maryland. 9 years ago. Different victim. Different circumstances. Same conclusion. Missing time. Unexplained behavior. No memory afterward. My father reaches into the box one last time and removes the oldest file. I almost threw this one away. The folder is worn nearly white along the edges. 23 years old. A teenage girl reported wandering nearly 15 miles from home with no memory of leaving. The responding deputy wrote that she seemed coherent except for one repeated statement. My father doesn't make me read it. He remembers it. Quietly, almost to himself, he says the words from memory. She told us she wasn't alone in her own head. The room falls silent. Carver looks down at the files spread across the table. 3 cases, 3 decades, 3 different jurisdictions. No connection anyone ever found. Until now. My father folds his arms. I spent years thinking these were the weird ones. He looks at me. I think these are just the ones that got noticed. Across the room, Nathaniel closes his eyes. Not because he's hiding something, because for the first time since we brought him here, I think he's realizing how long people like him have been leaving footprints behind, and how many others may have walked the same path before him. Chapter 6. First Recruit. The files stay on the table long after everyone stops reading them. My father disappears into the kitchen to make coffee, more out of habit than necessity, while Carver stands near the window with his arms folded, staring out at the empty lot below the safe house. Nathaniel hasn't moved. He sits quietly, his attention drifting over the old reports without offering commentary, as though he's looking at evidence from someone else's life. I understand the feeling. The girl from 23 years ago keeps finding her way back into my thoughts. 15 miles from home. No memory of leaving. Telling deputies she wasn't alone inside her own head. If someone had handed me that file a week ago, I probably would have come to the same conclusion everyone else did. Trauma, dissociation, an isolated psychological event. Now, I'm not sure any of those words mean what we think they do. Carver finally turns away from the window. I made the call. My father sets 4 mugs down on the table. And? He's in. That's all Carver says at first, like the rest should be obvious. It isn't. Who? I ask. He reaches into his jacket and slides a thin personnel file across the table toward me. The photograph shows a man somewhere in his early 50s, with dark hair beginning to gray around the temples. No smile, no attempt to look approachable, just direct eye contact with the camera. Dr. Adrian Cross, Behavioral Sciences Unit, former FBI consultant, specialized in cognitive profiling, memory disorders, and abnormal behavioral presentation. I flip through the rest of the file. Publications, joint agency consultations, military advisory work. A quiet career spent studying people whose minds refused to fit inside ordinary explanations. He retired? I ask. Carver nods. Officially. And unofficially? He got tired of writing reports nobody wanted to read. That answer earns the smallest smile from my father. I know the feeling. Carver sits down across from me. Cross spent years working cases that didn't make sense. Witnesses changing stories. Suspects behaving completely outside established profiles. He started arguing that there were patterns traditional psychology couldn't explain. And the Bureau ignored him. They listened, Carver says. Right up until they decided the explanations were getting expensive. Nathaniel finally looks up. He's seen people like me? Carver shakes his head. No. Nathaniel frowns slightly. He's seen what people like you leave behind. The room grows quiet again. There's an important difference between those two things. One creates belief. The other creates obsession. I look back down at the photograph. What does he know? Nothing, Carver says. He knows we found a pattern that matches some of his old work, that's all. And when he starts asking questions? Carver's expression doesn't change. Then we decide how much truth he can handle. Nathaniel studies the file for another second before speaking. The teacher used to say the smartest people are the easiest to fool. My father looks over at him. Why? Because they trust that everything has an explanation. The words stay with me while I close the folder. Outside, the sun is beginning to disappear behind the old warehouses surrounding the building, shadows stretching across the empty pavement below. How soon can he get here? I ask. Carver checks his watch. He's driving now. Something settles over the room after that. Not relief, just expectation. For the first time since leaving the mountains, someone new is about to step into this world we've been building around ourselves. And I can't stop wondering whether we're bringing him into an investigation or inviting him into the middle of something that possibly started long before any of us were born. Chapter 7. The File. Adrian Cross arrives just after dark. The knock at the door is measured. 3 even taps against the metal frame, followed by silence. Carver opens it without asking who it is. The man standing outside matches the photograph almost perfectly. Average height, dark jacket, one small overnight bag slung over his shoulder. He looks less like a retired federal consultant and more like a college professor who took a wrong turn on the way home. His eyes move once across the room before he steps inside, cataloging faces without lingering on any of them. Carver closes the door behind him. Adrian. Thomas, he replies in kind. No handshake, no unnecessary conversation. Carver gestures around the room. Mara Vale, Elias Vale. Cross nods politely to each of us before his attention settles briefly on Nathaniel. He says nothing. You want the short version or the long one? Cross never takes his eyes off Nathaniel. I think, he says quietly, I'd rather hear why the restrained man looks like he's attending his own funeral. Nathaniel looks back at him. For a second, neither of them speaks. Then Cross walks a little closer. You're not angry or frightened, he says. You're grieving. The room goes completely still. Nathaniel blinks once. My father looks at Carver. Carver doesn't react at all. Cross studies Nathaniel another moment before turning back toward us. What happened to him? Carver answers carefully. He lost something. Cross nods slowly. That's what I thought. You don't seem very surprised. I spent 20 years interviewing people who survived things they couldn't explain, Cross says. You eventually learn the difference between trauma and absence. Nathaniel lowers his eyes. Cross notices that too. Interesting, I think. Very interesting. Carver leads him toward the kitchen table where the old case files are still spread out. Cross sets his overnight bag down without opening it and begins reading immediately. No introductions. No background questions, just evidence. Virginia, Maryland, the teenage girl. He moves through the files quickly but not carelessly. Finally, he stops. These aren't random. No, I say. They never were. Cross looks at me for the first time. You've seen this before. It's not really a question. I hesitate. Carver steps in before I answer. Mara was involved in one of the investigations. Cross accepts that explanation without pushing. For now. He taps one finger lightly against the oldest file. All three witnesses describe the same thing from different angles, he says. Loss of agency, presence, discontinuity of memory. My father folds his arms. You got a diagnosis? Cross shakes his head. No. That answer somehow makes me trust him more. What I have, he continues, is a pattern. He reaches into his bag and removes a thin manila folder. I almost didn't come, he says. Then I remembered I kept this. He slides it across the table toward Carver. The tab reads, Meridian. Nobody moves for a second. Carver looks up. You know what this is? Cross gives a small shake of his head. No. The answer comes so simply that I believe it immediately. I found the name attached to a consultation request almost 15 years ago. The meeting was canceled before it happened, and every record connected to it disappeared a week later. My pulse quickens. You kept a copy. Cross looks at me. I kept the cover sheet. Carver opens the folder. Inside is a single page. No report, no explanation. Just an administrative routing form. At the top, in faded government print, are 3 words. Project Meridian Initiative. Beneath that, one line remains visible where the rest has been blacked out decades ago. Consulting specialist requested, Dr. Selene Ward. I stare at the page. Nathaniel does too. Then, very quietly, almost under his breath, he says something none of us expect. She was real. Nobody answers him, because for the first time since this investigation began, Selene Ward isn't just a missing name buried inside a database. She was a person, and she left a paper trail. Chapter 8. The Name. Nobody speaks for a while after Nathaniel says it. The words settle over the table differently than everything else we've uncovered. Meridian was still an idea, a forgotten program. The teacher was a voice without a face. Even the old case files my father found belonged to strangers whose lives had brushed against something they couldn't explain. But Selene Ward existed. She had an office somewhere. She signed paperwork. She attended meetings. Somebody thought enough of her work to request her by name. Then somebody else erased almost all of it. Cross carefully slides the single sheet back out of the folder and studies it under the overhead light. What is it? Carver asks. A consultation request. Cross taps the faded government seal near the top. Somebody asked for her specifically. My father pulls one of the kitchen chairs out and sits down slowly. So, she was an expert. Cross nods. Looks that way. Nathaniel hasn't taken his eyes off the paper. I turn toward him. You said the teacher respected her. He blinks once, almost surprised I remembered. I heard stories, he says. From who? He shakes his head. I don't know. The answer irritates me more than it should. You keep saying that, I say. The frustration coming out more than I would have liked. Because it's true. His voice stays calm. The people I met, they didn't talk about where they learned things. They passed stories around. Fragments. Warnings. And Selene was one of them? Nathaniel nods once. They said she understood what was happening. Cross finally looks up from the file. Understood what? Nathaniel meets his eyes. The difference. Nobody says anything. Cross waits. The difference between what it was that was being studied, Nathaniel continues quietly, and where it originated. The room falls silent again. Carver breaks it first. If Meridian was studying people like you, then somebody had to find them. Cross agrees immediately. You don't build a program around one subject. My father leans forward. You think there were teams? Cross thinks about it. They must have employed recruiters. That word stays with me. Not investigators, not scientists. Recruiters. People whose entire job was identifying individuals who didn't understand what they were. I look back toward the folder. What if Selene wasn't studying them? Carver turns toward me. What do you mean? What if she was finding them first? Cross considers that carefully. To help them? I don't know. Nathaniel speaks again before anyone else can. To protect them. Every eye in the room turns toward him. He lowers his voice slightly. The stories always ended the same way. I can see him trying to decide whether he should continue. Finally, he does. They said she stopped bringing people back. The sentence hangs there. Carver frowns. Back from where? Nathaniel gives a faint shake of his head. I don't know. Cross closes the folder. I think she left Meridian. Carver looks at him. Based on one page? Cross nods. If she stayed, there would be records, promotions, publications, administrative history. He taps the blacked-out document. Instead, somebody erased her. My father folds his arms. People don't erase failures. No, Cross says quietly. They erase problems. I look back down at the name one more time. Dr. Selene Ward. Somewhere in the last 24 hours, she has changed from a lead into a person. A scientist. A recruiter. Maybe a protector. Maybe something else entirely. And I can't shake the feeling that if we ever find out what happened to her, we'll understand why Meridian was buried in the first place. Across the room, Nathaniel stares into the darkness beyond the window. Almost to himself, he says, the teacher looked for her. The words are barely louder than a whisper. Then he adds something that chills the entire room. And he never found her.
Chapter 9. Observations. The rain arrives sometime after midnight. I hear it before I look up from the desk, a soft rhythm against old windows that have survived longer than most of the people who once sat in this room. Buildings collect history whether they intend to or not. Enough years pass, enough conversations are spoken into the walls, and eventually the place begins to remember them for you. A single folder rests open beneath the lamp. The paper inside is worn from being handled too often, the corners softened by time. Most of the official markings have faded now, but the name remains clear. Ward, Selene. Governments believe records create permanence. They are wrong. Records disappear every day. People are harder to erase. I close the folder and walk to the window. The property beyond the glass sits empty beneath the rain. No neighboring lights, no traffic, no movement except water finding its way through the darkness. Isolation was always easier than hiding. People search where they expect to find something. They rarely consider the places everyone has already forgotten. Selene understood that. She understood many things before the others did. Meridian found me by accident. At least that is what they believed. They had assembled fragments from old reports and witness interviews, strange incidents scattered across decades that refused to fit inside ordinary explanations. Missing time, contradictory testimony. People claiming they had stood outside themselves and watched their own lives continue without them. Most of the researchers dismissed it. A few became curious. Selene became determined. The first time she reached toward me, she did not know what she was doing. Most people cannot sense another mind at all. A very small number can feel the edge of something they cannot explain and retreat from it before they understand what they touched. She reached farther, and when I answered, she reached back. I have only known that to happen twice. The memory remains perfectly clear. She wanted to understand. That was always the danger. For a time we worked together. Meridian believed they were studying an anomaly. They gathered names and histories while Selene and I quietly searched for others who carried the same hidden ability. Young men and women who had survived experiences they could never explain. Children who spoke about voices that were not there. People who learned to ignore instincts that told them someone else had been standing inside their thoughts. She found them more easily than I did. She could reach outward in ways I never entirely understood. Not control, not intrusion, recognition, like hearing the faint echo of a familiar song from very far away. She called them recruits. Meridian called them subjects. Eventually she understood the difference. The program was changing. The people funding it were no longer interested in observation. They wanted application, prediction, influence, control. They believed the ability could be refined, directed, weaponized. Selene knew they were wrong, not because it could not be done, because they believed they had discovered something new. She had already begun finding older traces by then, stories that survived long after the people who told them were gone. Accounts scattered across journals, court records, monastery archives, forgotten languages. Different names, different explanations. Always the same phenomenon. Always the same quiet suggestion that this had existed long before governments, long before nations, perhaps long before history had learned how to preserve itself. The last time I saw her, she was leaving. She said the program would destroy itself because people always mistake understanding for ownership. I asked where she intended to go. She smiled. Somewhere they won't think to look. That was many years ago. Meridian believes she is dead. Perhaps they are right. I have searched for her more than once. I have found nothing. No presence, no silence either, only absence. There is a difference. The rain grows heavier against the glass. Far away, Mara Vale is probably trying to make sense of a world that no longer follows the rules she believed in. She reminds me of Selene. Not because they are the same, because they both refused to look away. The first time I touched Mara's mind, I expected resistance. Instead, she followed the connection. For one impossible moment, I felt another consciousness searching for me with the same quiet certainty I remembered from long ago. I have spent many years believing that was no longer possible. Now, I am no longer certain. I returned to the desk and opened the folder once more. Selene's photograph stares back at me from a page the government forgot to destroy. I rest my hand on it for only a moment before closing the file. If she is alive, she already knows about Mara. And if she is gone, then perhaps Mara has inherited more than either of them yet understands.